Recovered log 77A, entry 1. Command authorization code Sigma 7. Recon officer, Tharn Vek. We came to Earth in silence. No grand displays, no mass landings. We weren't there to conquer. That part was already over. They didn't even know it. Humans had wiped themselves out long before we arrived. The planet was quiet now. No more signals, no more wars, just the slow breathing of a world recovering from its own sickness. Radiation hotspots, craters, twisted metal cities strangled by vines. Their satellites were dead, their weapons rusted, and their monuments crumbled under time and ash. Some said we were too late. Others said we were just in time to learn what not to become. I didn't care. I just followed orders. The dropship groaned as it descended over what used to be southern Germany. Our heat scans had picked up an underground complex, a large one. Reinforced steel, ancient wiring, low residual power still pulsing in its veins like a dying heart. Strange thing was, it was built long before the global extinction, way before Earth's final war. The records, what little remained, called it WW2 Bunker E-77. No other planet had things like this. No one built monuments to failure like humans did. We touched down near a collapsed hillside, ash-thick air wrapping the troop doors. No life detected. No threat. Still, I checked my plasma rifle 3 times before stepping out. Instinct. If Earth taught us anything, it was that something always waited in the dark. There were 3 of us. Me, Second Officer Kroll, and Signal Tech Dern. I trusted Kroll. He didn't ask stupid questions. He scanned, he cleared, he moved. Dern was newer, always talking, too curious. Thought everything was amazing. Dern was the first to spot the entrance. Concrete and steel, half buried in rubble, but still sealed tight. There was a symbol above the doorway, a black cross inside a white circle, surrounded by red. Dern asked what it meant. Kroll just muttered, "Human war symbol." Old one, from before their final collapse. We cut through the lock with fusion torches. The moment the seal broke, the air changed. Thick, dry, and laced with something foul, like rust, rot, and guilt. My eyes adjusted to the dark. We stepped inside, light beams cutting through centuries of dust. The walls were covered in strange charts. Photos of men in uniforms, raising their fists, saluting something unseen. Some smiled. Others looked empty. Dern activated his scanner. This place was built in 1944, Earth standard. He muttered, "Purpose, unknown. Possibly military, possibly research." The deeper we went, the worse it got. We found rooms lined with beds, restraints still bolted to the metal frames, scratched names on the walls, numbers, symbols. One room had murals, paintings of human figures twisted and contorted, surrounded by what looked like scientific equipment. There were notebooks, some still legible. Kroll picked one up and handed it to me. It was written in German, but our suits translated it. Test Subject 45. Exposure to cold increased time to death by 6 minutes. Further experimentation required. I closed the file. Dern looked pale, even through his helmet. We weren't in a military bunker. We were in a lab. A death lab, the next room proved it. There were bones, hundreds, piled in pits, tagged, categorized, stored like they were specimens, not people. Children, women, elderly, all humans, all victims. The system had names for some of them. Polish, Jewish. Roma, I didn't know what those words meant, not then. But I knew what evil looked like, and it was buried here, beneath the soil of a world that tried to forget itself. Dern found the film reels next. Dozens of them, stored in lead containers. I didn't want to watch. But Command wanted intel, so we played them. The first reel showed a man in a long coat walking down a line of prisoners. He pointed left, then right. Some went one way, some the other. There were screams, smoke in the background, trucks moving like machines feeding a furnace. I turned it off after 60 seconds. No one spoke for a while, even Dern. The silence was thicker than the dust. We had come looking for data. What we found was truth, and it was worse than any weapon. Humanity didn't go extinct because they lacked intelligence. They went extinct because they let monsters wear uniforms and called it order. And the worst part? They recorded everything. I didn't sleep after what we saw in that bunker. Not that I usually sleep on recon drops. But this felt different. It wasn't just the silence of a dead world pressing in from all sides. It was the weight of what we had walked into. Something deeper. Something human. Command wanted full scans and retrieval. Said the site was historically critical. That was their way of saying, we want proof of how far humanity was willing to fall. I didn't argue, but part of me wanted to just seal the doors again. Burn the entrance, leave it buried. Kroll stayed silent too. He'd been through combat. He'd seen entire planets turn to glass under orbital fire. But this wasn't war. This was precision cruelty. Cold, deliberate. Carried out in dark rooms by men in white coats while the rest of the world looked away. That's what shook him, I think. The banality of it. Dern, he started asking questions. Why would they do this to their own kind? He asked over comms, his voice raw. Because they could. Kroll answered, without looking up from his scanner. There was no heroism in what we found next, just more of the same. Files, photos. Some of the images were taken by the humans themselves, smiling guards posing next to emaciated corpses like trophies. There were notes describing gas compositions, timings, what the victims did before death. Subject screamed for 3 minutes, ceased movement at 3:47. One report was labeled Efficiency Audit. It listed how many people could be processed in a single night. I didn't read the rest. We eventually reached the final level of the complex. It was a vault, thicker walls, heavier doors. This one took longer to breach, the lock fried and fused with old corrosion. Dern rerouted the power through his suit's core to force the hydraulics. When the door hissed open, a wave of stale, sterile air spilled out. Inside we found the preserved lab, untouched by time. Stainless steel tables, syringes, tools that made no sense even to our tech. There were tanks in the far wall, each holding what looked like attempts, mutations, half-formed human clones, some with missing limbs, others with double sets of eyes. A few still had scraps of skin clinging to them, floating in thick yellow fluid. One had its mouth open, like it had died screaming inside the glass. That's when the generator kicked in. Lights flickered to life. An old AI core, miraculously still functional, began booting up. Its voice was distorted, broken by time and damage, but clear enough. Welcome to Reich Protocol Laboratory 9. Authentication required for continued access. We froze. The name Reich had come up in the files. A human regime, a government obsessed with purity. Genocide as science. Kroll barked into the comm. Shut it down. Dern hesitated. We should hear what it has. I said shut it down. But it was too late. The AI began playing archived logs, force-feeding them through our suits. Day 132. Subject groups 5 and 6 showed increased aggression after introduction of serum variant B. Mortality rate 93%. Recommend continuation. Day 145. Test success. Indoctrination complete in under 6 hours. Young males between ages 12 to 17 prove most susceptible. Suggest scaling for future deployments. I ripped the connection from my chest plate. The logs stopped. Kroll smashed the console. Dern stared at the floor, not saying a word. He hadn't disconnected. He'd heard everything. We stood in that lab for what felt like hours, surrounded by the stench of old ambition and fresh horror. Earth's wars hadn't just destroyed cities, they'd hollowed out the species from the inside. These weren't outliers or fringe experiments. These bunkers were funded, built, and operated by governments. Signed off, documented, accepted, and then buried. That was the final betrayal. Not that they did it, but that they tried to hide it. As if history was a stain they could wipe away if they just waited long enough. Outside, the wind howled through the trees again. The sun had set while we were underground. Long shadows stretched across the dead land. Even the birds didn't sing. Dern finally spoke, quiet, shaking. We thought humans were primitive, but this isn't primitive. This is something else. I didn't answer. I just sealed the vault behind us. Not to protect it, to punish it, let the dead rot in the dark they created. We left the bunker behind, but it didn't leave us. The farther we walked from it, the heavier the silence grew. Not the silence of a dead planet, but the silence between us. Me, Kroll, and Dern. 3 soldiers from a civilization that thought we understood war, thought we had seen the worst that life could offer. We hadn't. The bunker taught us that the real monsters aren't born. They're built. By fear. By ideology. By men with pens, not just guns. The dropship was just over a ridge, camouflaged against a cracked field where wheat had once grown. I remember stepping over the rusted remains of a child's bicycle half buried in the mud. The little things always hit the hardest. That bike wasn't from the bunker, it was from the surface, from a world that had continued after those atrocities were committed, a world that had forgotten. As we reached the ship, command patched in. Recon Sigma 7, transmit findings. Forward all recordings. Prioritize bunker schematics and AI data. I hesitated. Kroll looked at me. You want them to see that? I knew what he meant. Some things should be preserved, yes, but not all things should be shared. If knowledge was power, then some knowledge was poison. I opened the channel and responded. Negative. Data unstable. OI logs corrupted in breach. Partial files only. It was a lie, but one that tasted right. Dern didn't object. He just slumped into his seat and stared at the floor like he hadn't left that lab. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe none of us had. We were prepping for launch when Dern finally spoke again. Sir, what if they weren't the worst version of themselves? I turned to him, frowning. What do you mean? He looked up, eyes distant. What if that wasn't their lowest point? What if that thing we found was just one part of what they were capable of? We saw one facility. What if there were thousands? What if worse things were buried deeper? Kroll scoffed. Then it's a miracle this planet lasted as long as it did. But Dern shook his head. No, that's just it. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because they were strong in all the wrong ways. Efficient, focused, brutal. It's like they made cruelty an art form. He wasn't wrong. That was the thing about humans. They didn't kill for survival. They killed for ideals, for borders, for myths. They built systems around hatred, gave it uniforms and oaths and flags. They taught it in schools, passed it down like heirlooms. And the bunker was proof that no atrocity was too far, so long as it was done in the name of order. We launched silently. No victory chants, no mission complete speeches, just the low hum of engines rising into a sky that had watched too many empires burn. On the ascent, I reviewed our scans again. The bunker we found wasn't unique. It was one of many. Heat signatures showed at least a dozen similar structures scattered across the northern continent. All deep underground, all sealed. I knew what command would say. Extract, analyze, learn. But I'd seen enough. Whatever truth was buried in those bunkers, it didn't need to be resurrected. Not again. 2 days later, we docked with the orbital command platform. Debriefing was standard. Sterile. A few officers reviewed the logs we allowed them to see. None of them asked what we didn't include, but someone always knows. A senior analyst approached me after the session, her face unreadable. "We appreciate your discretion," she said quietly. "The Council agrees this information may destabilize certain narratives." I didn't reply. I didn't care about narratives. What I cared about was what we brought back without knowing. Dern hadn't spoken since we left the planet. Not a word. He'd just stare out the viewing glass at the blue orb below, like he was waiting for it to speak. Kroll handed in his resignation 3 cycles later. Said he was done with recon. I didn't blame him. He'd seen plenty, but nothing stuck like Earth. And me? I was promoted, lead recon officer, more planets, more missions. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that lab. Those tanks, the faces pressed against glass, locked in frozen screams. And worse, those who put them there. They looked like ordinary men, not devils, not monsters, just men. And that's what haunts me. You don't really leave Earth, not after you've walked through its graveyards pretending they were bunkers, not after you've stared evil in the face and realized it doesn't wear horns or crawl, it walks upright, makes coffee, takes notes, and signs documents with a handshake. It's been 3 cycles since the E-77 operation. I've gone on 6 missions since. Different worlds, different species, but none of them stay in my memory like Earth. That place? It's quiet now, yes, but not dead. It's simmering, waiting, like a wound that hasn't healed, only scabbed over. I caught Dern in the data core last week. He wasn't assigned there. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just stared at the projection he'd pulled up. The bunker map, room by room, camera by camera. He had memorized it. I could see it in his face. The way his eyes moved like he already knew every corner, every corridor. "You're not sleeping," I said. He nodded. "Neither are you." He was right. I hadn't slept in days. "You keep digging like that and you'll go mad." "I think we already did," he replied. I should have written him up. Instead, I told him to delete the files and walk away. Pretend Earth was just another extinct species on the ledger. He didn't delete anything. A week later, the Council summoned me. Apparently, Command had received a transmission, encrypted, unauthorized, originated from a private station near the Outer Ring. Someone had leaked partial logs. Footage. Some of the worst images from Bunker E-77. Human bodies, the gas chambers, the experiments. They wanted to know if it was me. I said no. They believed me. Mostly because they wanted to. They didn't want this getting out. Not just because of the horror it revealed, but because of the fear it might inspire. The truth about humanity's past wasn't just history. It was a warning. A mirror. And no one wants to admit how close we all stand to the same cliff. They let me go with a warning. But I knew the leak was Dern. I confronted him the next day. No shouting. Just 2 soldiers sitting in the mess, pretending to be calm. "You leaked it?" I said. He didn't deny it. "Why?" I asked. "Because people need to know," he whispered. "They need to understand what humans were, what we could become if we ever forget." "It'll cause panic." "It should." He wasn't some idealist anymore. He looked tired, hollowed out, but determined. "You know they'll come for you." "I hope they do. Maybe they'll finally ask why a species capable of that much cruelty was even allowed to exist in the first place." That night, Dern disappeared. No trace, no ship logs, no breach alarms, just gone. The next week, we received a message on the long-range frequency. Unmarked, unauthenticated, bouncing through a dozen satellites. But the voice was clear. The truth is buried in more than just dirt. If you think Earth was the only place this happened, you're wrong. Look deeper. Look at yourselves. Then silence. I didn't report the transmission. Instead, I pulled up the deep archives, the kind locked behind a dozen authorizations. I started digging. Not just into Earth, but into us. Our wars, our camps, the way we handled the fringe colonies when they resisted, the way we silenced rebellion under the term stabilization. It was all there, tucked away in the fine print of progress. I stared at one report for hours. Population relocation successful, civilian resistance neutralized, genetic variants eliminated for long-term uniformity. That wasn't from Earth. That was from our own records, 3 decades ago. Dern was right. We didn't study Earth to understand them. We studied it to see ourselves, to gauge how close we were to the same fall. And I was starting to think, maybe we were already falling. Maybe Earth was just a mirror we were too proud to look into. I closed the file and sat in the dark. No sleep, no peace. Just the weight of knowing that monsters don't always hide under your bed. Sometimes they wear your badge. They reassigned me after the leak. Quietly. No formal reprimand, no charges, just a shift in duties. Strategic reassessment, they called it. They sent me to a listening post orbiting a frozen moon on the edge of dead space. No mission, no crew, just silence and long reports I wasn't meant to read too closely. That's how they handle people like me. Not with execution, but with exile. At least executions are honest. The station was old, patched together from prefabricated hulls and forgotten protocols. Half the systems barely worked. The AI stuttered during startup. Gravity stuttered worse. But it didn't matter. They didn't send me here to work. They sent me here to be forgotten. The funny thing is, they underestimated how much silence I could tolerate. After what I'd seen in that bunker, silence was mercy. Silence was clean. But silence also makes you think. I started pulling old recon logs, not from Earth, but from the fringe colonies. Early settlement reports, civil unrest suppression. Most of the files were redacted, names blacked out, locations scrambled, but the patterns were clear. Populations marked as unstable were relocated, not always with transport, sometimes with force, sometimes permanently. One log caught my eye, dated back 80 years, remote planet called Varnus Delta, population 60,000, agricultural colony. One entry, then silence. No departure records, no relocation manifests. Nothing. Wiped. The only remaining data was a sterilization log, atmospheric cleansing under the guise of pest control, done via orbital drone sweep. 60,000 people gone. The report labeled the action as habitat optimization. We always thought of Earth as uniquely brutal, an outlier, a species that fell too far, too fast. But I'm starting to think Earth wasn't the exception. It was just the most honest. At least the humans filmed their atrocities. At least they wrote them down. We just erased them, and then moved on like it never happened. I kept digging. Every log brought me closer to the edge. We used to mock human history for how much blood it spilled in the name of race, of faith, of ideology. But here we were, centuries later, using new words for the same crimes: genetic deviation, cognitive instability, cultural contamination. We'd just become better at hiding it behind data and policy. One night, or cycle I guess, since you can't tell time in dead space, I heard the comm beacon blink. Unregistered frequency. I patched it through on instinct. Static. Then a voice. Familiar. Dern. His voice was clearer this time, sharper. They've lied to everyone, Tharn. Not just about Earth, about everything. The exterminations, the colonies, the labs. It's bigger than we thought. I froze. They want us to think Earth was some kind of warning, A tragic story of what happens when hatred wins. But they're lying. They didn't bury Earth's crimes. They learned from them. Then the transmission cut off. I tried to trace the signal. It bounced across dozens of relay points, masked. Dern knew how to cover his tracks now. He was still alive, and he was still digging. A few days later, another package arrived through a deep channel. Compressed files, encrypted logs, footage, more bunkers, not just on Earth, on other colonies. Same architecture, same experiments, different species. Turns out the Reich's science didn't die in 1945. It evolved, adapted, copied. We didn't just stumble on human horror. We inherited it. Dern's message ended with 6 words, embedded in the file title. We didn't find the blueprint. We are it. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the broken gravity stabilizers. I thought I was done with war, thought I'd seen the last of humanity's darkness buried beneath their soil. I was wrong. The darkness wasn't buried. It was planted, and someone's been watering it ever since. After Dern's transmission, the silence around me became something else. Not peace, surveillance. I began noticing small changes. The internal cameras in the station, which hadn't functioned properly since I arrived, suddenly rotated on their own. The AI, which once stuttered through basic diagnostics, now completed full environmental scans without me requesting them. And the daily maintenance report. It arrived precisely at 0600 every cycle, down to the second. Someone was watching. The data Dern sent me had changed everything. There were coordinates hidden in the file metadata. Old colonial sectors we'd long since classified as abandoned. And each one showed signs of excavation, deep underground facilities with matching heat signatures to Earth's Bunker E-77. Same energy patterns, same design. Only these weren't built by humans, they were built by us. Not us as in recon soldiers. Us as in the Directorate. The ruling elite had known. For decades, they didn't suppress Earth's truth to protect us from it. They did it to protect themselves. I couldn't sit still anymore. I rerouted power from the comms array and locked down the station's primary AI. Manual control only. If they were watching, they'd have to do it through guesswork. Then I pulled the jump logs from an old recon vessel still docked in the hangar. It was half-rusted, barely flight-ready, but its nav system was intact. Destination: Sector 3KJL Minor, one of the colonies in Dern's list. Flight approval would flag me. So I didn't ask. I launched during an ion storm. Signal interference would buy me maybe 5 hours before they noticed the breach. It was enough. The jump took 4 cycles. That's 4 cycles of silence and nausea and tightening gravity while I played Dern's last message over and over again. We are the blueprint. JL Minor had no welcome beacon. No satellites. It looked empty. But the moment I descended into the atmosphere, the ship's instruments picked up faint radiation signatures. Low level. Controlled. Artificial. Someone had turned this place into a lab. I landed near the mountain range where the signal was strongest. From above, it looked like the surface had been split open, an old mining scar that went deep. Too deep. I brought a handheld scanner and descended alone. The tunnels weren't natural. They were structured, reinforced with alloys older than anything we used now. There were still lights embedded in the walls, flickering but alive. Whoever built this place didn't care about aesthetics. It was raw function. After nearly an hour, I found it. Another bunker door. Identical to Earth's. Same steel, same lock mechanism, same symbol etched faintly into the concrete. A circle of lines, almost like a sun collapsing inward. I hacked the entry port. No resistance. Inside was darkness, and then... Motion sensors flicked to life. A low hum crawled through the corridor. It was active. Inside the first chamber was almost a replica of E-77. Observation windows, restraint beds. medical tools laid out with surgical precision. Only this time, the subjects weren't human. They were ours, our kind, our species, modified, opened, cored. There were rows of files, physical paper, sealed in vacuum packs, dozens of pages, diagrams, test logs, a language I recognized but didn't want to read. Then I found the core room. It wasn't like Earth's AI center. This one was newer, sleeker, clean. The interface came to life as I stepped in. "Welcome, Officer Tharn Vek. Identity confirmed." I froze. "You have accessed Archive Theta. Clearance, black." I had never heard of Archive Theta. No one had. The screen changed, footage loaded, clips, images, project after project. Colonies sterilized, populations engineered, failures terminated. Every tactic, every method, the same as Earth's Reich systems. But they weren't stolen from humans. They were replicated, recreated, evolved, and behind every log, every authorization was a symbol. Not a government, not a faction, a committee, unmarked, anonymous. One directive, repeated over and over: control breeds peace. Evolution requires pain. I backed away. My legs wanted to collapse. My chest felt hollow. Because I finally understood what Dern meant. We didn't find Earth's bunkers and recoil in horror because they were foreign. We recoiled because they looked familiar. Because on some level, we recognized ourselves. Not just what we could become, what we already were. I thought I knew fear. I'd faced live combat. I'd watched comrades vaporized mid-step. I'd stood in bunkers of human death and evil. But nothing, compared to the feeling I had standing in that archive room, knowing the walls weren't holding history. They were hiding a blueprint. Our blueprint. It was all there. Names, designations, even known dissident groups within our current territories. Colonies that had gone silent weren't accidents. They were case studies, targets for psychological strain tests, atmospheric deprivation, genetic filtration. And worse, some of them passed. The files were organized like it was routine, like sterilizing a population was just part of maintaining balance. Field experiments, sector reports, outcome analyses. It wasn't a system of war, it was governance. And we weren't just inheriting human mistakes, we had perfected them. There was a video log embedded at the end of the archive chain. No timestamp, no name. Just a file called Foundation. I played it. It showed a room, dim, grey, sterile. 5 figures sat in silence. No insignia, their faces blurred, voices distorted, but one sentence came through clean. They burned their world down. We simply took notes. The screen flickered to static. Then the second part played. Clips from different planets, different time periods, children crying, corpses stacked, camps, processing centers, scientists in coats dissecting bodies that still twitched, each clip tagged, each one labeled success. Then the final message. Humanity was not a warning. It was a tutorial. I wanted to vomit. I staggered out of the archive room, hands shaking. I didn't care about stealth anymore. I just wanted air, sky, anything that didn't smell like sterilized evil. But at the exit of the facility, I wasn't alone. 2 figures stood near the broken entrance, rifles in hand. Not soldiers, not directorate officers. Something else. Plain uniforms, no rank, black visors. Silent. They didn't raise their weapons. One of them held out a small drive. No words, no expression, just an order, unspoken but clear. Take it. I did. They turned and walked back into the tunnels, vanishing like ghosts in a mausoleum. Back on the ship, I scanned the drive. It was a simple message. You're not the first to find it. You're just the first to survive it. That means you're useful. We're not resistance. We're not rebels. We're the last line. If you want to stop what's coming, meet us. Encrypted coordinates attached. Bring nothing. Trust no one, especially not command. Dern, he was alive. Not just alive, but inside something larger. A movement, maybe, or just a group like me, soldiers who walked into the truth and couldn't unsee it. I debated sending the message to command, flagging it, burning it. But deep down, I knew what would happen. They'd erase me. Not with a shot to the head, but with silence. Reassignment. Lost in a system that perfected forgetting. So I set the ship's coordinates to the ones in the file. No destination label. No planetary ID. Just deep space, far from charted routes. I prepped for launch, heart pounding, 100 questions crashing in my head. What if it was a trap? What if Dern had broken? But what scared me more was the opposite. What if he was right? What if we were still following the script Earth left behind? Because if that's true, then extinction wasn't a tragedy. It was a test run. And this time, we weren't just the observers. We were the designers. The jump lasted longer than any I'd taken before. 3 cycles stretched into 5, then into 7. The further I went, the quieter everything became. Not just outside the ship, but inside my own head. That's what guilt does. It hollows you out, piece by piece, until silence becomes the only thing you recognize. The destination was a black patch on the edge of a forgotten system. No name, no orbiting satellites, just a husk of a moon circling a dead gas giant. And carved into its side like a scar was a hangar bay, manual only, no beacon, no welcome. I landed. The atmosphere inside the bay was cold and dry. No lights, no noise, just faint footprints in the dust leading toward a blast door, carved with a symbol I now recognized too well. Not human, not ours. Something older. A circle of thorns around a single downward spike. It meant silence, control, purge. And beneath it, in worn script, the words, "Do not enter if you still obey." I stepped through. Inside, the lights flared dimly. A makeshift outpost. Gear scavenged from every faction in the system. Human relics, our own tech. Even scraps of machinery I couldn't identify. This wasn't a hideout. This was a war room. Dern was waiting. He looked different, hardened, eyes darker. But he still stood like a soldier, like the rank hadn't been stripped, just buried. Around him stood others. A dozen, maybe. Mixed uniforms, former officers, engineers, civilians. One wore the robes of a historian from the outer archives. Another had cybernetic augmentations forbidden by the Directorate's purity laws, and they were all staring at me like they'd been waiting forever. Dern didn't waste time. "You saw it?" I nodded. "All of it." "Then you know what they are." I did. The Directorate, the Command, the Council. They weren't our leaders. They were curators. Curators of a legacy that started on Earth, nurtured in its darkest hours, cultivated through its cruelty, and then transplanted into a new empire under the guise of peace and progress. They didn't learn from the Reich. They mimicked it, upgraded it, gave it clean uniforms and sterilized language, erased the screams but kept the systems. I looked at Dern. "How long have you known?" "Since the day we left that bunker," he said. "But I didn't run. I followed the trail." He pointed at a massive display on the far wall. It showed dozens of red markers across the galaxy, each one representing a facility, a test zone, a forgotten colony. Every one of these is active. Everyone still follows the protocols. Population filters, behavioral compliance, genetic standardization. They don't call them camps anymore. They call them preservation centers. And the people? Used, measured, silenced. You know the rest. I did. We stood there for a long time. Then he handed me a file. A new log. Coordinates, mission data, internal directorate messaging. It wasn't just evidence. It was a plan. "You're not here to run," Dern said. "You're here to choose." I opened the file. The next target was marked in red. A colony called Ketha Prime, slated for population recalibration in under 12 cycles. 500,000 people, families, children. None of them knew what was coming. "They'll make it look like an accident," Dern said. "A systems failure, power grid collapse, blame the locals, mourn the loss, move on. And if we stop it, they'll call us traitors." I looked up at him. "No," I said. "They'll call us human." He cracked a smile. First time I'd seen it since Earth. The others began prepping, loading gear, mapping infiltration points. Not a formal army, but something stronger. A choice, a break in the cycle. Before I left, I uploaded one final log into the old satellite relay buried near the edge of the outpost. Unencrypted. Raw. A message to anyone who might still be watching. "We found the truth beneath their soil. We followed it through our own systems. And now we know. Earth's horror wasn't a disease. It was a design. But we can choose to be something else. This time we fight not to conquer. This time we fight to forget the script." Ship prepped. Coordinates locked. I'm going back into the dark. But this time I'm not just recon. I'm resistance. And I'm not alone.